Welcome to Babblecom 5. So this is episode 2 of Crusade, depending on which play order you're watching it in, of course. I am sticking to the DVDs, but what I'm going to do, it occurred to me, is do another playlist where I do it in the recommended watching order. So I guess some of my comments may be influenced by the fact that I'm watching it in DVD order, but if you want to sort of do the recap in what is viewed as being a better watch order, then you'll be able to do that too. And I think I can get 2 for the price of 1 that way. That's all good. So this is the planet Irregular 4 that we're seeing, and the locals are having a little bit of trouble with a golden dragon. Not the usual fare for Babylon 5, although it's almost immediately a bit of a hint at what might be going on later in the episode. This episode is called The Long Road. So you see the Excalibur, and Gideon is convinced that the basketball hoops on the ship are defective because he can't get his ball to go through one. And Matheson is here to tell him that they've had a request basically to go and assist some Earth Force teams who are on the ground on Regular 4 and who are encountering this slightly scaly problem. Despite the fact that they have starships in orbit, they don't seem able to deal with it. And Gideon decides that they'll go and have a look at it and see what they can do to help, because apparently they are loosely involved with helping with the plague. And Gideon is quite intrigued when he hears that there's a dragon involved, and he asks what colour it is, as if that might be significant. Whereas Gideon is simply more bemused by the fact that there's a dragon involved. Plus, he hasn't asked Gideon to get involved yet. Galen to get involved yet, but apparently he's going to anyway. So we've got the Orion and the Medusa in orbit, and the Orion rings a bell with me, and I don't know quite why. I dare say if I looked it up, I'd probably discover that it was an Omega class that we've seen in Babylon 5 before now. It's quite possible. They all tend to use these sort of Greek mythological based names. So Excalibur joins them in orbit, and they take a shuttle across to one of the Omegas. And there they find that there is a mining operation going on planet for a mineral that has antiviral properties. So that would obviously be of use in the current circumstances to try and limit the impact of the draft plague back on Earth. However, the ground operations have not been going all that smoothly, including an instance of a heavy transport having its engines turned into a substance resembling peanut butter, which makes Galen laugh quietly to himself. And of course the Earth Force captains are not quite so impressed, and although there haven't been any deaths as yet, it's slowing the whole process down, basically, these various acts of sabotage. So Gideon and Galen decide to go down to the planet and suss things out for themselves, get dressed up in appropriate attire and take a shuttle down. And in the local inn, Gideon immediately gives himself away as not being a local, because the amount of currency he offers to the bartender is sufficient to buy the entire bar when all he wanted was a pint. They are then accosted by various unhappy locals and are rescued by a gentleman called Alwyn. And it is immediately apparent that Alwyn is very well respected, but he clearly has some tricks up his sleeve, because all the candles in the place go out as he enters the building. So he then comes in, suggests that Gideon and Galen are in his employ from elsewhere on the planet, and basically that they're idiots, could come from the shallow end of the gene pool, and they should be left alone on that basis. So the locals do then leave them alone, which they are perfectly happy with as a concept. And Alwyn then takes them back to his house to have a little word in their shell-like, because of course he knows who they are. And indeed Galen knows him. And it is fairly rapidly revealed that Alwyn is in fact a fellow techno-mage, although like Galen, he is not quite in the Order as a whole. In fact, he's effectively in exile on this planet, but he's been helping the locals out. And he's basically saying that he's accused of causing trouble and being a troublemaker, and he objects to this very violently and decides to show them exactly what a troublemaker looks like. And it turns out that basically Earth Force are strip mining for this mineral that they need very, very close to the village which houses the people that he protects. And he explains that there is nowhere else on the planet for the people to go to, because they can't move away from the mine, because it's not like there's loads of infrastructure. Because I haven't mentioned, but this is a planet on which the local population have elected to lead a very agrarian lifestyle, which means they don't have tech. So they don't have lots of ground transport, lots of roads, sophisticated medical facilities. They've gone purposefully low tech. So for that reason, they also can't fight back against Earth Force. So Alwyn has been running his sort of little guerrilla war in his classic technomage style. And he does warn them that if Earth Force come with guns, then they will leave in boxes, because up until this point he's been holding back. But obviously Earth Force are working on the basis that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, in terms of justifying why they should drill at this site, because it's the fastest and easiest way for them to do it, rather than trying to find a more remote mineral deposit, because apparently the minerals kind of linked to the water supply. So he and Galen then have a bit of a heart-to-heart whilst Gideon is contacting the ship. And we learn a bit more about Galen in that exchange. It turns out that Elric, who was his mentor and adoptive father, not his actual father, has passed away in the time since the two men last met each other. And they sort of, Alwyn wonders whether or not Galen might take over from him when he passes or chooses to leave the planet. But Galen says that he determines his own path. In the meantime, we see that locals have taken matters into their own hands and have kidnapped several members of the Earth Force security team on the mining operation, which of course is only going to inflame things. And when Gideon returns to the Technomages, he updates Galen on the situation, which of course is a cause for concern for Alwyn, because these are his people. And on the Medusa, the captain decides that his the Green Lieutenant should go down and rescue the hostages, which means that there is going to be a conflict situation brewing. So they take off in their shuttles and are met by the great big golden dragon. But fair dues to the lieutenant, despite being green, he determines that the dragon has to be, logically, a hologram. And despite it shooting flame in their general direction and being generally impressive, they successfully pass through it, and its body is indeed revealed to be a sort of a holographic mesh and a construct. So they make it to the planet, they make planetfall, and they go in and accost the local population in the pub. And at that point, of course, things go a little bit south for them, because the pub door opens, the lights go out once more, and in a pool of smoke, Alwyn suggests that they might be better off being somewhere else, basically. And just to prove the point, Galen comes in to back him up, but he doesn't really need it, because he's got lots and lots of hollow demons on his side. And unlike the hollow demons that we've seen in Babylon 5 before now, that once had a little word with Londo, these ones turn out to be semi-solid, because Alwyn explains to Galen that he's incorporated some synthetic elements into them, so they're not just imagery, they are in fact able to throw a punch. And they do so, and the Earth Force officers are rapidly subdued, and when they check in with their ship, they have to admit that they haven't rescued the hostages, and in fact they have been added to the hostage count. So not the lieutenant's finest hour, and apparently he won't be getting promoted perhaps quite as quickly as he thought he might have been doing. So we're left in a sort of a renewed stalemate situation, but then something else happens, and the pub landlord's daughter suddenly falls very seriously ill, and Alwyn determines that all of the locals have been exposed to the sort of virus dampening mineral for a very long time, so they've all developed a sort of tolerance for the mineral, but the drilling has caused it to become aerosolized, basically, so it's gone airborne. So she in particular, because she spends more time outside than most, she's taken in more of the mineral than has previously been the case in a shorter period of time, and as a result it's overloaded her system and it could be fatal, and he doesn't have the facilities to treat her, so he does what he can, but he realizes that now they have no choice but to put an end to the digging, because otherwise the entire local population is going to suffer. And of course, although Gideon, in credit to him, goes up with the daughter to try and persuade the Earth Captain to stop, the Earth Captain isn't really massively prepared to take it at face value, wants to send her off for more medical tests elsewhere, further delay things, which of course isn't palatable. And in the meantime, equally unpalatable, Alwyn goes to see the locals and basically asks them what the hell they think they're doing, because they are not helping the situation, they're inflaming the situation by taking more hostages and not agreeing to let them go. I mean, they are sort of afraid of him, but he basically says that they are no better than cowards or criminals if they choose to take hostages and don't now choose to release them given the circumstances. He wants them to rise above that sort of behaviour, because otherwise he's going to have to act himself, and if he does so, then there will be consequences for them. And he's been with them for 12 years, it turns out, so he's been in exile with them for 12 years, but he isn't able to talk them down, basically. So he goes to take matters into his own hands. So what then happens is that Gideon tries to persuade the Earth Captain that he needs to stand down, but he's still not willing to do it. But then Galen calls up to say that up until this point Alwyn's been holding back, but now he's decided that he's got to take matters into his own hands, and what he's doing is using the mining operations sort of crater as almost like a satellite dish to amplify his powers, so he's not holding back anymore. And Gideon suggests that he's going to be able to destroy the Medusa from the ground by virtue of focusing his powers in this way, as he sort of builds an increasingly impressive light show. And the Earth Captain is taking this threat very, very seriously and basically asks Gideon to nuke him from orbit. And Gideon reluctantly agrees to do so, because obviously he can't stand by whilst an Earth Force ship gets blown up. So he powers up the main guns, takes the shot, and Alwyn and of course the mining installation which he's sitting in the middle of are seemingly destroyed, and all that's left are smoking ruins with Galen watching on. So the bartender's daughter is fixed up, and he agrees that he will help the Earth Force teams to relocate the mining sites to somewhere safer for all concerned, and regrets the loss of Alwyn. But as it turns out, Alwyn is not in fact lost, because as with everything else techno-magi, nothing is quite as it seems. So although Galen chastises him for leaving it rather late, he clearly was in fact just an illusion himself when he was conjuring up his illusion that he was going to blow the Medusa. So he acknowledges that it's time for him to move on, that he's taught them as much as he can, and perhaps he stayed there too long, that they now need to make their own decisions, and like the first ones before him, perhaps it's time for him to move on and let them grow into their own culture and their own sort of community without him. So having set this example of self-sacrifice and a better way of doing things, he's going to move on and see where the long road takes him. Hence the name of the episode. So he wonders if Galen might perhaps take over from him when he's finished his own sort of quest, but Galen doesn't seem particularly enamoured of that still as a concept, but maybe. And interestingly, we see that Gideon was clearly in on the plan, because Gideon sees him go and talks to Galen about the fact that he didn't say goodbye to him, and he said there was no need. So with that, the Excalibur heads off back into hyperspace, and we see a rather natty sort of technomage ship adorned with griffins on its wings take off and head wherever it's going to head. And this was production number 107, so it was actually, production number wise, it was actually before the first episode, Warzone, that I looked at last time. So I quite enjoyed this. I mean, it's always good fun when you get another technomage in the mix, and here we have two in the mix, of course. And they have this very entertaining conversation at one point about the quality of the hollow demons that Alwyn has come up with, and the sort of modifications that he's made, and Galen compliments him on the teeth, for example. So it's quite an entertaining little exchange between the two, whilst the Earth Force Marines are getting stuff knocked out of them. It doesn't move the plot along massively, but it reminds me quite a lot of, well, like things like Avatar, really, where the Earth has sort of gone in to grab the stuff that it feels it needs and sort of below the locals, basically, because here the locals are humans as well, and they seem to be, not particularly caring about that fact at all, and they're quite willing to do serious ecological damage in order to save the people on Earth. So it is a classic needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few sort of situation, but of course Alwyn doesn't really see it that way, and the reality is that there were other alternatives that could have been taken, and Alwyn unfortunately has to semi-sacrifice himself, I suppose, in order to make that point to the Earth Force and to force their hand to move them elsewhere. So the situation does kind of resolve itself, except that obviously the community lose him as a benefactor, but he realises that had he not been there, they wouldn't have taken such an aggressive stance. They wouldn't have taken the hostages, because they thought that he would have defended them no matter what, basically, and he wasn't prepared to do that ultimately. So that's why he chose to do the faking his own death bit, and to go off and see where he could be of use elsewhere. It's apparently he's a bit disappointed with Galen in some respects, because he thought that Galen would have declined to go into exile with the other technomages, which of course in the end he hasn't done, but initially he did. So it's apparent that like Galen, Alwyn is a little bit of an outlier when it comes to technomages, probably more so in fact than even Galen is, and it's kind of interesting because we don't know how widespread that feeling might be amongst them. We don't know how common it is for technomages to kind of go rogue, if you like, but they've clearly got a lot of power individually, and yet they don't seem to be acting together terribly often. They seem to act as groupings of individuals rather than as a sort of united force, because you get the impression that had the shadows come for them at any point, then if they'd worked together they could have actually held them off, possibly, but they've obviously chosen not to do that, because ultimately they are all very sort of individual technomages. So it's apparent, however, that they do have a sort of mentoring scheme. They obviously, people get brought into the Order. The Order do have children, and they obviously look after their own kind, because it seems that Galen was, in effect, sort of fostered might not be the right word, but he had an adoptive father rather than his own father having looked after him. But he was obviously very well looked after, and Alwyn clearly has a lot of time for him. So there's clearly a lot of depth to his character, which we haven't perhaps seen all of yet. And so that might be something that we see in later episodes. It's not really clear whether or not that's the thing that's going to get explored further. But we don't really see a lot of the other crew on the Excalibur at all in this episode. It's very much Technomage centric. I mean, Gideon's around and about, but he's not particularly critical to anything that happens in this particular episode. But it is quite nice to see other Earth Force personnel and see how they behave, because of course, we've had the advantage of seeing quite sort of enlightened Earth Force officers over the course of the Babylon 5 series, and Gideon himself, it's not really clear quite where his moral compass lies, really, because he said that he's prepared to do pretty much anything that needs doing in order to try and save Earth, and yet he's not so willing to do that he's on the same page as the Earth Force captain of the Medusa here. So it's interesting. There are definitely lines that he's not prepared to cross, and yet he has said that he's willing to do whatever he has to do, basically, to find a cure to the plague. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of slightly sort of two-edged sword kind of works out for him in the end, because obviously there are going to have to be times when he does have to make compromises that perhaps he wouldn't have done normally, given the situation. But right now, he clearly doesn't feel that that's necessary. So it's quite a fun episode. I mean, the CGI work with the dragon and stuff is pretty impressive for its time, and the demons are done in the dark, as is often the way with things like this in B5. So it gives them a little bit more wiggle room in terms of the CGI usage. But it's all good fun, and the body count is kept to a minimum, because the locals know that would be a bad thing if they started clobbering people. And indeed, Alwyn himself is very careful not to do any serious harm apart from bumps and bruises, basically. So as I say, it doesn't really move the plot as a whole along. It's nice to see the Technomage, but I don't think you can really say that anything of particular interest to the plot really happens, apart from you get a little bit more backstory about Galen. You see a little bit more interaction between him and Gideon, which is quite cheeky at times, which is quite entertaining. And also we see that some people from Earth don't actually choose to live in a high-tech fashion, which is quite interesting as well. So some of them do choose not to go that way, and have chosen to abandon technology in the favour of a more sort of simple lifestyle. So it's a solid episode. More than that you can't really say, I think, but it's it sort of builds on the general themes of the series, and it's the classic sort of JMS kind of script, but it's not what I would view as an arc episode for Crusade, because they've already found something on the planet that might help with the plague. So it's not like Excalibur's actually going there to find anything new, which is kind of interesting, because I was kind of surprised at the start of the episode where Gideon sort of says he doesn't mind going in to help, because I'm thinking, well, you've got 5 years maybe at maximum, and you're sort of spending your time going off to do sort of standard Earth Force assistance work. I mean, there's a very sort of tenuous link with it possibly assisting with something loosely to do with the Drac Plague, but actually I'm not convinced he was particularly on mission when he chose to go there and divert there. So it's a kind of flimsy episode in that sense. But anyway, we'll see what the next one brings, and I'll obviously try and keep my momentum up. Although the long road should be the road home should be with us. Lots of roads should be with us in about 4 weeks' time. I've now ordered my copy, so I've done my bit, and maybe I'll even get it a little bit early. You never know. So anyway, on that note, I will leave you and stay tuned for the next episode. Cheers for now.